Alrighty, aloha students. Here we go as we come to the end of our discussions of World War II, which, to be honest with you, we've spent quite a bit of time on in this course. One thing that cannot be forgotten is what are known as the Nuremberg trials, which, as you can see, started after World War II came to an end. And what you sort of have to remember is that as the war came to an end in Europe, at the end of 1944 and into 1945, that's when the camps, the concentration camps, the German concentration camps in Germany and especially in Poland were discovered. And as the world became more aware of what the Holocaust really was and what was really happening, and of course there have been rumors and some people knew more than others, there were some obvious things that were going on during the time period. The extent of the Holocaust was unknown until after the fact. And so there was this desire to say, let's do something about it to make sure nothing like this could possibly happen. And what I would say came out of that is something that is known as the Nuremberg trials. And so they started in November 1945, went almost for a year. And this was basically, it's a trial, and it's in plural because there were multiple defendants. And the desire of the Nuremberg trials was to put these Nazi guys on trial and hold them accountable for what the Nazi regime had done. And again, as I just mentioned, the reality of the horrific nature of the Nazi government and the Nazi policies towards Jews and others was really becoming apparent as the camps were discovered in 1945 especially. And so what are we really talking here? What are we going to put these Nazi guys on? And look, there was a big effort to capture as many high-ranking Nazis as possible. The Nuremberg trials, they sort of put really what was really about 22 major guys in the box, and really sort of they were the face of the trial. But there were numerous other Nazis who were captured. Some were even prison guards. Okay, so what are the totality of the charges? Well, we'll start with waging undeclared war. And one of the things you should sort of remember, of course, we made the map of the extent of the Nazi holdings in Europe. We made a map in this course. Very few of those occasions was a war officially declared. In fact, really one of the only times where the Nazi Germany declared war on another nation was when they declared war on the United States after the attack at Pearl Harbor. That was one of the very few times that it was really official. Otherwise, they were just invading and annexing. Certainly the wrongful treatment of prisoners, and this was not necessarily the camps that we think of as far as the Holocaust, or as what was known as the final solution. This has to do with prisoners of war. Particularly the Russians were interested in this. The Soviets were interested in this because of the horrific nature of the battle on really what was the Eastern Front, the Soviet-Nazi, Soviet-German fight. And of course, here we go. Letter C is this whole thing about crimes against humanity, the whole aspect of the treatment of the Jews, because it became very apparent that the vast majority of people in these camps were Jews. The survivors, the people who survived, were Jews, and they could tell the story. So the trial took 11 months, as you saw, had 8 different judges from multiple countries. There were 46 prosecuting lawyers who tried to convict 22 major defendants. Okay, and so these are some of the these are a lot of these are guys who were known by the world because even before World War II, they were recognized as leading members of the Nazi Party in Germany. All right, so when they filmed it and when they took pictures of it, the 22 defendants were literally in the defendant's box. I'll show you a picture of that in a moment. Translated into 4 languages. English, French, German, and Russian, I believe, were the 4 languages. And look, what is some evidence that was used? Well, the Germans are great record keepers, and they really documented a lot of the things that they did, what they They documented, you can make the argument, they documented the people that they put into the camps by tattooing them with numbers. So they were great record keepers, and as such that led to a problem, you could argue, for them at the end, because those records were used against them. And of course the photos of the camps were becoming readily available as they were being discovered, and those photos were used. And again, don't forget, there are many people who survived till the end and were not put to death in the camps. They survived, they lived, and were liberated by the Americans, the British, and the Soviets coming from the East as well, from the camps they were in. This is not necessarily an open and shut case, as you may imagine. Oh, well, this must be like this, got to be like the easiest thing in the world to convict these guys. How difficult could this be? It's so obvious that they were guilty. Yes, I agree, and we are going to see that guilty pleas, well, they're going to, not guilty pleas, but guilt is going to be put upon these guys, but there's problems. Okay, so now, what are some of these problems? Okay, well, I have often commented to you that military people are some of the people that study history the most. Well, people in politics and law may be another group of people. People in finance as well, they study history quite a bit. And so when you study law, one of the things you study is you do case studies, and you look at other cases that are similar to give you guidance on how to proceed with this new case. Well, the problem is that there were no laws on the books that existed that technically the Nazis had broken those laws. What the Holocaust and the final solution was something so new that nobody had ever really sort of conceived of something like this and doing something like this, so nobody could imagine something like this. And so when somebody does it, you go, holy cow, I can't believe somebody did that. How the heck do we deal with this? So there are no laws specifically that you could say, well, you broke this law. Okay, so what history can you follow? And so this became an issue, and this became a problem. And so this is something that the defense seized upon. And yes, the 22 defendants had lawyers that defended them as is appropriate in a trial. What was their defense? Well, their main argument, the main thing that they said, is that we were just carrying out orders. And we will see this happen. The Nuremberg trials are not the only trials after World War II for Nazi hierarchy. There are numerous trials throughout the decades after World War II. Some other high-ranking guys are captured, but in many cases they're lower-ranked people. Guards were even put on, guards at these prison camps were put on trial as well. This was a similar defense all the way through. We were just doing what we were told from the top, Hitler, Himmler, the ones who really sort of ran the final solution. And so therefore they refused responsibility for what was going on. They argued if we didn't follow orders, we would have been in trouble, and we would have been, our lives would have been at stake, even within Germany. Furthermore, this court has no legal power, and I go back to my point I just made about the problems of the prosecution. This was sort of the argument that they had no standing because the prosecution had no law specifically to base anything on. And so therefore this whole thing is nothing but victor's justice, and this whole thing was a scam and a sham. And so this was the argument of the defense, that this thing is completely and utterly ridiculous. Now, they also had a further defense. They could have used and could have argued, well, you're talking about the horrifying aspects of war that we supposedly did. How about the defense was not really allowed to point out that the Allies, it could be argued, committed similar terrible things, and maybe okay, well, you want to call the camps and the final solution an atrocity against humanity? Well, we can make the argument that the Allies did the same thing. Now, again, this argument was not allowed. So we discussed the Battle of Britain, where the German Air Force bombed At first military targets, but eventually civilian targets in England. They even bombed London. Well, as the war moved along, the Allies bombed German cities and bombed civilian targets. If you would like to look up one of these examples, look up the city of Dresden, Germany. This was a city that was really devastated by Allied bombings. So the German defendants were unable to bring this up. As to that discussion about having wrongful treatment of prisoners in the original sort of charges, all right, well, look, there were many Germans who were captured during World War II. And so while the Soviets wanted the discussion of wrongful treatment of prisoners put on the Germans, by similar argument, wanted to say, hey, Soviets treated many German POWs very poorly as well. There's a lot of stories about how many Germans who were captured by the Soviets alive never came home, even after the war had been settled. So that's a very testy subject. The entire aspect of, again, as I've commented to you all before, the Germans and the Soviets, that part of World War II was probably some of the nastiest warfare in human history. And those types of things, that awfulness bled after the war as well. Okay, so what should we say is the importance of the Nuremberg trials? Well, look, these types of trials, this type of ideal is something to say, hey, let's do something that, let's make a statement here. Let's have the world make a statement that the atrocities that we have seen these Nazis perpetuate, and we're going to nail them. We're going to put them on trial, and we're going to hold them to account. This will disincentivize anybody else from ever trying something like this. This will disincentivize war. And in a way, we could almost make the argument we're outlawing war. We will make war against the law. And because it will be against the law, nations will never do it again. And obviously, this is an aspect of the Nuremberg trials that was unsuccessful. Now, since World War II, you can make the argument that we have not had as a significant, there's no doubting this, we haven't had a significant sized war like World War II since World War II. Now, you could also make the argument that with the proliferation of nuclear weapons after World War II, with the Cold War, there was a potential that there could have been. This noble, idealistic concept and idea was unable to take hold and ultimately fails. Okay, so what happens to the 22 defendants? Okay, well, they're basically all found guilty. All right, you're probably not surprised by that. Of the 22, let's make sure. I think 21 were found guilty. Okay, 20 were found guilty. Okay, 20 of the 22 were found guilty. And of the 20 who were found guilty, 11 of them were condemned to death, of which 10 of them were hung. All right? Now, what about the other guy? This is the most famous story, ultimately, that comes out of the Nuremberg trials, is that this one Nazi that was not hung, he actually committed suicide. And he was the most famous Nazi that was there, and his name was, do you remember him? His name was Hermann Göring. And if you recall, Göring was a very well-known Nazi. He was number 2 or number 3 in the Nazi hierarchy beneath Hitler the entire time, even before World War II, and he was the head of the German Air Force. Do you remember that? The Luftwaffe. And so Göring was very well known, and he was the biggest catch. He was the biggest name that was the most worldwide renowned and recognized. He committed suicide. He held a pill. Apparently, he had a pill that he had hidden, and he had hidden it for a year and used it the night before he was to be hung. Okay, 9 were found guilty of lesser crimes. So look, Now suddenly, what do we have? And let me just say that they did do something like this after World War I. They had a trial like this after World War I. It wasn't effective. It was really ignored. You have to really sort of research it to find anything out about it. So this is the new standard, if you will. I sort of commented that there was no laws for which the prosecution could look to. There was no history that anybody involved with the trial could look to. Now people have something. From here on out, people have something. And look, there were other war crimes tribunal trials. I mentioned that other Nazis will be captured in subsequent years. The most famous one is a guy named Adolf Eichmann, who was captured in South America. The Israeli Secret Service went into South America and pulled this guy out. One of the other things I will talk about is the Tokyo War Crimes Tribunal. So the same thing happens in Japan, where a lot of these leaders of the Japanese were captured by the Allies and put on trial. Today we have something called the International Criminal Court, which is out of Europe, that still sort of keeps an eye on these things, and they run trials. They actually run trials quite a bit, even today. All right, and then just sort of a last thing, you may say, why is it called the Nuremberg trials? What is Nuremberg? Well, Nuremberg is a city. Nuremberg is a city in the area of Bavaria, if I'm not mistaken, and this city was specifically chosen to be the site for the trial. Now you may say, why? Well, this is the site, this is the place where Nazism was born. This is the place where it's, shall we say, if we're going to make an argument about where was Nazism founded, you would have to say in this area of Germany. It's a Bavarian area. Nuremberg, I believe, if I'm not mistaken on that. Nuremberg is a city where a lot of things, Nazi celebrations went on. And so the argument was, let's just do it this way. Nazism started there, and so we're going to take it there. We're going to go there, and we're going to make sure that Nazism dies there. That was the idea behind having it in this town of Nuremberg. It probably was, you can find various pictures of the Nuremberg trials. This is really sort of the most famous one. You can sort of see here the big box. Here is the 22 Nazi defendants right here. You've got some international soldiers. And there's some areas here where you can see a lot of people are wearing headphones. And if you kind of zoom in just a tad here, you can kind of see really the two most famous Nazis that they had were, here's Göring right here wearing sunglasses. And this was a guy named Rudolf Hess. He's kind of an interesting story. He actually was was the one that Hitler dictated Mein Kampf to when they were in jail together after the beer hall putsch. And he had sort of a strange falling out and end to his career as a Nazi. He stole a plane, he took a plane and flew to England and spent the last half of the war in England. Very unique story. So there are some of the other guys. This is one of the famous sort of pictures of that time period. I would just sort of throw this out at you. I mentioned the Tokyo War Crimes Tribunal. Here is a famous picture of that, and the most famous person, the big dog that they caught at this one. So we call this the Tokyo War Crimes Tribunal right there. And this gentleman right here that was captured, this gentleman, here he is. His name is Hideki Tojo, and he was sort of the face. He was sort of the face of. He was a leader of the army and sort of the face of the aggressiveness of the Japanese during the time period of World War II leading up to. He was captured. He had tried to commit suicide. He tried to commit suicide, and American doctors saved him, and then they put him on trial, and then he was put to death. Okay, so there you have it, the Nuremberg trials. There's your 22 defendants right there. Very fascinating and interesting bit of history. All right, everybody, hope you enjoyed that conversation. Hope you learned something new today. See you next time.